My name is Loretta Ashby, and what I'm about to tell you is something I spent 18 months trying to forget, and another 6 months deciding whether I had the right to say out loud. I'm 68 years old. I built a catering business from a folding table in my garage in Knoxville, Tennessee. I want you to understand that before anything else, because the rest of this story won't make sense unless you know who I was before it happened. I was not a fragile woman. I was not someone who needed to be taken care of. I made wedding cakes at 2 in the morning and drove them 3 hours to venues in Nashville before sunrise. I negotiated contracts with hotel chains. I hired and fired and rebuilt my team 3 times over 22 years. I knew every line of my own financials. And then my daughter decided I didn't. Her name is Renata. She's 41. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and for most of her life I considered that a gift. I raised her alone after her father passed. She was 9 years old when I lost him, and I worked twice as hard so she would never feel the shape of that absence. I put her through college. I co-signed her first apartment. When she married her husband, Clifton, I gave the toast at their reception, and I meant every word. I want you to know I loved her. Past tense is hard, but you'll understand why by the time I finish. It started the way these things always start, slowly, with things that sounded reasonable. Renata called me in the spring of 2022, right after I turned 67. She said she was worried about me. I'd had a small health scare the previous fall, nothing serious, a brief episode of high blood pressure that my doctor had already addressed, but she had latched onto it. She started coming by the house more often. At first I thought she was just being attentive, and I felt guilty for how much it annoyed me. Then she started asking about the business, not in the way a daughter asks because she's curious, in the way someone asks when they already have an answer in mind. She wanted to know about the accounts. She wanted to know if I had an updated will. She asked me once very casually whether I'd ever considered transitioning out of daily operations. I told her I was 67, not dead. She laughed. I laughed too. I should have stopped laughing sooner. Clifton was the one I didn't fully trust, even then. He'd been working in commercial real estate for about 6 years, and he had that particular quality some men have, the kind where they speak slowly and confidently about things they only half understand, and they've done it so long they've convinced themselves it's the same as expertise. He started joining Renata on her visits. He'd walk through my kitchen with his coffee mug and make little comments. You know, this space could be redesigned for better flow. That kind of thing. I'd smile and change the subject. What I didn't know was that in the months while I was smiling and changing the subject, the two of them had already consulted an attorney. I found this out later. Much later. When it was too late to matter. In September of 2022, I slipped on my back porch steps. I'd been carrying a tray of sample pastries to my car. It had rained the night before, and I went down hard on my left hip. I broke it. I was 67 years old, and I broke my hip. And if you know anything about what that does to a person's world, you already understand how quickly everything changed. The surgery went well. The recovery was difficult, not because of the injury itself, but because of what happened in the spaces around it. I couldn't work for 6 weeks. Renata came and stayed with me for the first 2, and I was genuinely grateful. She cooked for me, helped me with physical therapy appointments, handled some of my business calls. She was so helpful that I gave her temporary access to my business email, just to manage correspondence while I was laid up. Just temporarily. I want you to remember I said that. By the time I was back on my feet and back in my kitchen, something had shifted. I noticed it in small ways first. A supplier I'd worked with for 11 years seemed confused when I called. He mentioned he'd already spoken with my associate about the fall contract. I had no associate. 2 of my longtime staff members seemed uneasy around me in a way they couldn't quite explain when I pressed them. And my accountant, a quiet man I trusted for 15 years, had retired unexpectedly, and the new firm now handling my books was one I'd never hired. I started asking questions. The answers came back strange. There was a gap in my email records that I couldn't account for. One of my business accounts had been restructured, not emptied, nothing so obvious as that, but the ownership signature had been updated. To add a cosigner, Renata. When I confronted her, she was calm. That was the part that frightened me. She didn't get defensive. She sat across from me at my own kitchen table and she said very quietly, "Mum, I've been worried about you for a long time. We all have." Then she produced a document, a letter from a physician, a doctor I had never seen, with a practice I had never visited, describing a cognitive evaluation I had never taken. The letter expressed concern about my capacity to manage complex financial decisions. I told her that was a lie. She told me she knew this was upsetting. She told me she was doing this because she loved me. I asked her what this was. 3 days later, I had my answer. She and Clifton had filed a petition in Knox County Probate Court for a guardianship and conservatorship over my person and my estate. They were asking a judge to declare me legally incapacitated. I want you to sit with that for a moment. A document existed, signed by a doctor I had never met, saying I could not manage my own affairs. My daughter had filed that document with a court. And in the weeks before my hearing, I began to understand the full shape of what was happening. I could not access my own business accounts. The co-signature requirement Renata had quietly added now meant any withdrawal needed her approval. My regular attorney had received a letter, supposedly from me, saying I was switching representation. The new attorney assigned to my case was someone Clifton had recommended. Someone, I later found out, his firm had used before. When I walked into that courtroom, I did not have the lawyer I needed. I had the lawyer they had arranged for me to have. The hearing lasted less than 40 minutes. I spoke. I was coherent, clear, and furious, and I don't think any of that mattered. The petition was granted on a temporary basis, pending a full evaluation. I was placed under a limited guardianship. I lost control of my business accounts. I lost the right to make certain financial decisions without oversight. They did not put me in a facility, not immediately, but the monitoring began. 2 months later, following a second evaluation I believe was compromised, the judge extended the order. Renata was named my legal guardian. Clifton was named conservator of my estate. I was still living in my own house. I was still making my own coffee, walking my own dog, driving to the grocery store. But on paper, I no longer existed as a legal adult capable of managing my own life. That is its own kind of imprisonment. I want to tell you about the 18 months that followed. Not to dwell in them, but because I need you to understand what they were made of. They were made of phone calls I wasn't allowed to have without supervision. They were made of my business, which I had built from a folding table in a garage, being restructured by Clifton while Renata signed off on everything. He merged my company with a hospitality consulting firm he was quietly building. I watched it happen through the narrow window of information I was allowed to have. My long-time employees were phased out or quit. The name changed. My name, Ashby's Kitchen, became something called Prestige Catering Concepts, LLC. 22 years erased in 9 months. They were made of visits from Renata that felt like inspections. She would come on Sunday afternoons and ask me how I was doing in a voice that sounded like kindness but felt like surveillance. I answered her questions. I kept my expression neutral. I made her tea, because by month 3 I had decided something. I was not going to fight them where they expected me to fight. There was a woman in my neighborhood, a retired family law attorney named, well, I'll call her my neighbor, because she asked me to keep her out of it publicly. She had seen the guardianship notice posted, as they're required to be in Tennessee, and she knocked on my door one Tuesday morning with a casserole and a very direct question: did I know what my rights were? I did not. She spent the next 14 months teaching me. I want to be clear about something. I did not tell Renata or Clifton what I was doing. I did not warn them. I did not confront them, threaten them, or give them any reason to adjust their behavior. Every Sunday when Renata came for tea, I was exactly the mother she expected, a little slower than I used to be, a little uncertain, grateful for her help. I poured her tea and I listened to her update me on the business, and I said very little. What I did, quietly, was document everything. My neighbor helped me understand what a guardianship proceeding actually requires. There are standards. There are ethical obligations. The physician whose letter had launched this process had a license, and that license had a board, and that board had a complaint process. The attorney who had been assigned to represent me had a duty to actually represent me, and there was evidence that he had not. The restructuring of my business during a conservatorship, without proper court approval and accounting, was not just aggressive, In several instances, it was illegal. We didn't move fast. We moved carefully. By month 10, we had filed a complaint with the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners against the physician who had signed that initial capacity letter. His records showed he had evaluated me for 35 minutes, had no prior relationship with me, and had been referred by Clifton. This was not the standard of care required under Tennessee's Adult Protection Act. By month 14, we had a new attorney, one I had found through the Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services, completely independent of anyone Clifton could reach, and she had filed a motion to terminate the guardianship based on evidence that the original petition had been built on a fraudulent medical assessment. I still made Renata her Sunday tea. She had no idea. I want to tell you about the morning I drove to the courthouse for my termination hearing, because I've thought about it every day since. I wore the suit I wear when I sign major contracts. Navy blue, bought in 2015, still fits perfectly. I did my hair the way I did it when I opened my business. Pulled back, serious, I mean business. My neighbor drove me. We didn't talk much on the way. When we walked up the courthouse steps, she squeezed my arm and said, "You built a business from a folding table. This is nothing." She was right, and she was wrong. It was everything. The hearing lasted 4 hours. My attorney presented the medical board complaint, which had resulted in a formal investigation of the physician who had signed my capacity letter. She presented phone records and emails showing communication between Clifton and that physician's office in the 6 weeks before my evaluation. She presented the financial records from the conservatorship, showing the improper business restructuring. She presented the documentation that my original assigned attorney had failed to request an independent evaluation, which is required under Tennessee law. Clifton sat at that table, and I watched his expression change as each document was entered into the record. He had the look of a man who had spent a year believing the thing he built was solid, and was only now discovering how thin the foundation was. Renata sat beside him. She didn't look at me. The judge terminated the guardianship that afternoon. He also referred the matter to the Knox County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential elder financial exploitation, a felony under Tennessee Code Annotated 71611. He referred the assigned attorney to the Board of Professional Responsibility. He ordered a full accounting of every financial decision made during the conservatorship period. I walked out of that courthouse at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Thursday in March. I stood on the steps in my navy suit, and I breathed the cold air, and I did not cry. I had done my crying in private over 18 months, in the early mornings before anyone could see. Standing on those steps, I had nothing left to cry about. What I had was a list. The DA's investigation took another 8 months. I'll tell you what came of it, because I believe you deserve to know the ending. Clifton was charged with 2 counts of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The conservatorship, combined with the improper restructuring of my business and the transfer of 2 significant assets, my commercial kitchen equipment lease and a piece of commercial property I owned, without court approval or proper accounting, met the threshold for criminal charges. He pled guilty to 1 count in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was required to make full financial restitution, pay court costs, and serve 3 years of supervised probation. He lost his real estate license. Renata was not criminally charged. The DA found insufficient evidence that she had direct knowledge of the fraudulent medical assessment, that Clifton had arranged it without her specific knowledge. I don't know whether I believe that. I think about it sometimes in the way you think about something you've decided you can't know for certain, and have to let sit. What I know is that my daughter had signed documents that took away my rights. She had sat across from me for 18 months and poured herself tea in my kitchen and watched me carefully for signs of deterioration that were never there. Whatever she knew or didn't know, she had let it happen. She called me 2 weeks after Clifton pled guilty. She wanted to explain. She wanted to tell me that she had been genuinely worried, that she had trusted Clifton's judgment, that she had not understood the full extent of what he was doing with the business. I listened. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I told her I needed time. That was 14 months ago. She still sends cards on my birthday. I still receive them. I have not yet decided what I will do with that. My business is not what it was. 22 months of mismanagement and restructuring does real damage, and I won't pretend otherwise. 3 of my original staff members came back when I reached out to them. We're working out of a smaller commercial kitchen now, in East Knoxville, and I have 2 standing contracts with event venues that I rebuilt from scratch. It is not the empire I had, it is mine. That's the part that matters to me. It is mine. If you are someone watching this and you have a parent, an aunt, a grandmother, a neighbor, a woman of a certain age who built something and is now being told by the people around her that she can no longer manage it, I want you to hear this. The system that is supposed to protect vulnerable adults can also be weaponized against them. Guardianship and conservatorship abuse is real. It is common, and it is devastatingly easy to execute against someone who trusts the wrong people. And if you are that woman, if you are sitting somewhere right now watching this on a phone or a laptop, feeling the shape of what I'm describing, I want you to hear this more than anything else. Be quiet. Be still. Keep pouring their tea. And find your neighbor. Because the day you walk out of that courthouse in your navy suit will be the best day of your life, and it will be worth every single Sunday afternoon you spent pretending. My name is Loretta Ashby. I built a business from a folding table, and I built it back. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect, not in any mystical sense. I'm talking about the plain, unglamorous version of it, the kind where what you do simply accumulates, and eventually the weight of it lands somewhere. It always lands somewhere. Clifton spent years speaking slowly and confidently about things he only half understood. That quality, which I mistook for harmless arrogance, turned out to be the engine of everything that followed. He believed that because he could construct something, a petition, a paper trail, a fraudulent evaluation, it would hold. He didn't understand that the same system he manipulated had mechanisms in it designed specifically for what he did. He wasn't clever enough to be as clever as he thought he was, and that gap between the scheme he imagined and the reality of what he'd actually built is where everything fell apart for him. That's not fate, that's not karma in the spiritual sense. That's just what happens when someone builds on a false foundation. The structure looks fine from the outside for a while, and then someone pulls one document, and the whole thing comes down. What I want to say about intelligence, real intelligence, not the kind that gets you through a real estate licensing exam, is that it requires honesty about what you don't know. I didn't know my rights when this started. I said that plainly, and I'm not ashamed of it. But the moment my neighbor knocked on my door with that casserole, I got honest about the gap in my knowledge, and I started filling it. That willingness to say, I don't know this yet, and then actually do the work of learning it, that is what saved me. Not luck. Not someone riding in to rescue me. 14 months of sitting at my kitchen table reading Tennessee probate law and building a case one document at a time. Renata is a harder thing to write about than Clifton. Clifton, I can explain with greed and self-interest. Renata, I still can't fully explain, and I've stopped trying to force an explanation that makes it simple. What I know is that she made choices. She signed documents. She sat across from me every Sunday and let it continue. Whatever she told herself she was doing, she was participating, and that participation has a cost she's still paying, in ways I can see and probably in ways I can't. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think it's the most important thing I could tell anyone who is raising a child right now. Character is built in the small moments, not the large ones. The large moments, the petitions, the hearings, the courtrooms, those are just where the small moments finally become visible. Every time Renata let Clifton make a decision she knew wasn't right, she was building toward that courthouse. She didn't walk in there on one bad day. She walked in there on 100 small ones. And I want to say something about what it cost me to stay quiet for 18 months. People ask me how I did it, how I sat there and made her tea, and didn't say a word about what I was preparing. The honest answer is that it cost me enormously. There were Sunday afternoons when she left, and I sat in my kitchen for an hour without moving. But I had made a decision about what mattered more, the relief of confrontation or the outcome I was actually working toward. Every time I chose the outcome, I was building something too. Not a legal case, exactly. Something inside myself. A kind of steadiness I didn't know I had. I built a business from a folding table. I built it back from almost nothing. And somewhere in between those two things, I learned something I couldn't have learned any other way. That the most powerful thing you can do in a situation designed to make you feel powerless is to refuse to act powerless. Not loudly. quietly, deliberately, one document, one phone call, one Tuesday morning at a time. That's the whole lesson, really. It's not complicated, it's just hard.